The interstate stretched endlessly before Jack Morrison's weathered hands, gripping the steering wheel of his 18-wheeler like an anchor to reality. At 47, he had spent nearly 3 decades navigating the arteries of America, carrying cargo from coast to coast, but more importantly, carrying the weight of a life filled with unspoken regrets and carefully buried memories. The constant hum of the diesel engine had become his meditation. Drowning out the whispers of a past he preferred to leave in his rearview mirror. Every mile marker represented another step away from the boy who had grown up in a small house with cracked windows and a mother whose faith was stronger than her circumstances. That woman had raised him with calloused hands and a heart full of prayers, teaching him that sometimes the most profound love came wrapped in silence. Now, Bakersfield was home, a modest place where his wife Sarah understood his long absences and his 2 teenage children had learned not to expect bedtime stories when Dad was on the road. They knew Jack's love came in the form of steady paychecks and the occasional postcard from distant cities, not in lengthy conversations or family game nights. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt as Jack's truck rumbled into Compton, a city that wore its struggles like old scars. The buildings seemed to lean into each other for support, and the streets told stories of dreams deferred and hopes that had learned to survive on scraps. This wasn't his usual route, but a last-minute delivery change had brought him to this forgotten corner of the map. His cargo today was simple: cleaning supplies for a small business on the outskirts of town. Nothing glamorous, nothing that would make headlines. Just another routine delivery in a career built on routine. The plan was straightforward: complete the delivery, grab some hot food, rest a few hours at the truck stop, and hit the road before dawn. Jack had perfected this rhythm over the years, finding comfort in its predictability. But as he navigated the potholed streets of Compton's periphery, something caught his eye that made his foot ease off the accelerator. Time seemed to slow as his gaze fixed on a scene that pierced through his carefully constructed emotional armor. A young woman stood beside a weathered bus stop, her exhaustion evident in every line of her posture. She held a handmade cardboard sign with words he couldn't quite make out from this distance, but her message was clear in the universal language of need. Beside her sat a baby stroller, and within it, a child slept peacefully. Oblivious to the harsh reality surrounding him, the woman wasn't actively soliciting help. There was a dignity in her stance that spoke of someone who had fallen on hard times, but hadn't lost her sense of self. She simply existed in that space, her presence a quiet testament to circumstances beyond her control. Jack felt something stir in his chest, a familiar ache that he hadn't experienced in years. The scene before him seemed to unlock a door in his memory that he had deliberately sealed shut. Suddenly, he was 7 years old again, watching his mother stand in similar circumstances outside the grocery store, too proud to beg, but too desperate to pretend everything was fine. His mother had possessed that same quiet strength, that same way of carrying hardship without letting it break her spirit. She would stand there with her chin lifted, her faith intact, waiting for Providence to notice her plight. And somehow it always did. A stranger would offer work, a neighbor would share a meal, a small miracle would appear just when hope seemed lost. The memory hit Jack with such force that he found himself pulling over without conscious thought. His emergency flashes clicked rhythmically as he sat in his cab, staring at the young woman who seemed to embody every prayer his mother had ever whispered into the darkness. For several minutes, Jack remained frozen, his hands still gripping the steering wheel as decades of buried emotions surged to the surface. He had spent so many years running from his past, from the poverty and uncertainty that had defined his childhood, that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to truly see someone else's struggle. The woman shifted slightly, adjusting the baby's blanket with infinite tenderness. And Jack saw in that simple gesture all the love his mother had poured into raising him despite their circumstances. She had worked double shifts at the diner, darned his socks by lamplight, and never once made him feel like a burden, though he knew now how heavy that burden must have been. A horn honked behind him, jolting Jack back to the present. Traffic was building up behind his stopped truck, but he couldn't bring himself to drive away. Something about this moment felt predetermined, as if all the roads he had traveled over the years had been leading him to this exact spot, to this precise intersection of past and present. Taking a deep breath that seemed to draw from the very depths of his soul, Jack shifted his truck into park and opened the cab door. The late afternoon air carried the scent of dust and distant rain, and somewhere in the background, he could hear the faint sound of a radio playing an old gospel hymn, the same kind his mother used to hum while she worked. As his boots hit the pavement, Jack felt the weight of destiny settling around his shoulders like a familiar coat. He didn't know what he was about to walk into, but he knew with absolute certainty that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Chapter 2: An Unexpected Encounter. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you're watching us. Let's continue. Jack approached the young woman with the cautious steps of someone who had learned that good intentions could sometimes be misunderstood. The years on the road had taught him to read people quickly, to distinguish between those who genuinely needed help and those who might pose a threat. But as he drew closer, he saw only vulnerability wrapped in quiet dignity. The woman looked up as his shadow fell across her path, and Jack was struck by eyes that held depths of story he couldn't begin to fathom. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and clothes that had seen better days but were clean and carefully maintained. Her cardboard sign, he could now see, simply read, "Traveling with baby. Anything helps. God bless." "Excuse me, Miss," Jack said, his voice gentler than usual. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering, do you and your little one have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" The woman's first instinct seemed to be to step back, a protective gesture that spoke of too many disappointments and broken promises. She glanced down at the sleeping baby, then back at Jack, her expression carefully guarded. "We're fine, thank you," she replied, though her voice carried a weariness that contradicted her words. "We're just waiting for someone." Jack recognized the deflection. He had used similar phrases countless times when his own pride wouldn't allow him to accept help. "I don't mean to pry," he continued, "but it's getting late, and this isn't the safest part of town after dark. I'm a truck driver, been on these roads for almost 30 years. I've got a clean cab, and there's a diner up the road where we could get you and the baby something warm to eat." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The baby stirred in his stroller, making soft, cooing sounds that seemed to fill the space with innocence. The young woman looked at Jack with the careful assessment of someone who had learned to trust her instincts above all else. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why would you want to help a stranger?" The question hit Jack harder than he expected. Why indeed? He could have driven past, could have convinced himself that it wasn't his responsibility, that he had his own family to worry about. But something about this moment felt like an echo of a prayer he had never spoken aloud. "Because," he said slowly, "someone helped my mother once, when I was about your baby's age. She never forgot that kindness, and neither did I." The admission surprised him. He rarely spoke about his childhood, rarely acknowledged the memories that had shaped him. But standing here in the fading light of Compton, with this young woman who reminded him so much of his mother's strength, the words came naturally. The woman studied his face for another moment, then looked down at her child. "His name is Lucas," she said quietly, "and I'm Angela." "Jack Morrison," he replied, extending his hand. "Pleased to meet you both." Angela hesitated before accepting his handshake, her palm cool and slightly trembling. "You really don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Jack interrupted gently, "but I'd like to, if you'll let me." Something in his tone seemed to convince her. Angela looked around the deserted street, then back at Jack's face, searching for signs of deception or ulterior motive. Finding none, she nodded slowly. Just for a little while," she said. "Lucas needs to eat, and I could use a few minutes to sit down." Jack helped her fold the cardboard sign and maneuver the stroller toward his truck. As they walked, he noticed how she kept glancing back over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to follow, or as if she was leaving something important behind. "You from around here?" Jack asked, making conversation to ease the awkwardness. "I grew up here," Angela replied. Her voice distant. "Been away for a while, though. Just came back to take care of some things." There was a story there, Jack could tell, but he had learned not to pry too deeply into other people's business. Everyone carried their own burdens, their own reasons for being where they were. As they reached his truck, Angela paused, looking up at the massive vehicle with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "I've never been in one of these before," she admitted. "And it's just like a regular car, only bigger," Jack said with a small smile. "Here, let me help you with the baby." He reached for the stroller, and as their hands briefly touched during the transfer, Jack felt an odd sensation, like a spark of recognition that made no logical sense. Angela seemed to feel it too, because she pulled back slightly, her eyes widening with something that looked almost like surprise. "Sorry," she murmured, though neither of them was quite sure what she was apologizing for. Jack secured the stroller in the truck's cab, while Angela climbed up with Lucas in her arms. The baby was awake now, looking around with the wide-eyed wonder that only the very young possessed. His dark hair was soft and curly, and when he looked at Jack, he reached out one tiny hand as if recognizing a friend. "He's beautiful," Jack said, and meant it. Something about the child's face stirred a memory he couldn't quite place, like looking at a photograph that was almost familiar but not quite clear. As they settled into the cab, Jack started the engine and pulled back onto the road. The diner he had mentioned was only a few miles away, but somehow he sensed that this short journey would be the beginning of something much longer and more complex than either of them could imagine. Chapter 3: Echoes of the Past. The diner Jack had chosen was one of those timeless establishments that seemed to exist outside the flow of modern life. Its chrome exterior gleamed under the neon lights, and the smell of coffee and home-cooked meals drifted through the air like a warm embrace. As they entered, the bell above the door chimed softly, announcing their arrival to the handful of late-evening customers scattered throughout the red vinyl booths. Jack selected a corner booth that offered privacy and a clear view of the parking lot, old habits from decades of traveling alone. Angela settled across from him, Lucas cradled in her arms. And for the first time since their encounter, Jack could see her face clearly under the warm fluorescent lighting. She was younger than he had initially thought, perhaps 24 or 25, with features that spoke of mixed heritage and eyes that held stories far beyond her years. There was something hauntingly familiar about her profile, though Jack couldn't place where he might have seen her before. "Order whatever you'd like," Jack said, sliding a menu across the table. "It's on me." Angela's fingers traced the laminated pages, and Jack noticed how carefully she read each price, her lips moving silently as she calculated. "Just coffee and maybe some toast," she said finally. "That's not nearly enough," Jack protested gently. "When's the last time you had a real meal?" The question seemed to catch Angela off guard, and for a moment, her carefully maintained composure wavered. It's been a while," she admitted, "but I don't want to take advantage of your kindness." "You're not taking advantage," Jack assured her. "Trust me, I've been where you are. Pride can be a luxury we can't always afford." Something in his tone convinced her, and she nodded slowly. When the waitress approached, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and comfortable shoes, Angela ordered soup and a sandwich, while Jack requested his usual coffee and pie. As they waited for their food, Lucas began to fuss, and Angela reached into her worn canvas bag to retrieve a bottle. As she did, something metallic fell to the floor with a soft clink. Jack bent to retrieve it, and his breath caught in his throat. It was a small religious medal, tarnished with age, depicting a figure he recognized immediately. The exact same medal had hung from his mother's rearview mirror for as long as he could remember, swaying gently with every turn and bump in the road. He had asked her about it once as a child, and she had told him it belonged to someone very special, someone she prayed for every day. "This yours?" Jack asked, holding up the medal, his voice slightly strained. Angela looked at the object in his hand, and her expression shifted to one of confusion. I don't know how that got in my bag," she said slowly. "I've never seen it before." Jack studied her face carefully, searching for signs of deception, but found only genuine bewilderment. "It's just, my mother had one exactly like this. Wore it everywhere." "Had?" Angela asked softly. "She passed away 5 years ago," Jack replied, his voice thick with emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. "Cancer. She fought it for 2 years, but..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Angela reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. "I'm sorry," she said, and the sincerity in her voice made Jack look up at her with new eyes. "She would have liked you," he said impulsively. "She always had a soft spot for people who were struggling, but didn't let it break their spirit." Their food arrived, interrupting the moment, but the strange tension remained. As Angela fed Lucas small pieces of bread soaked in soup, Jack found himself studying her movements, the way she hummed softly to the baby, the gentle way she wiped his face. Everything about her maternal instincts seemed practiced, natural, as if she had been caring for children her entire life. The radio in the diner was playing softly in the background, mostly forgotten until a particular song began to play. It was an old gospel hymn, one that Jack remembered from his childhood, though he couldn't recall the name. But as the melody filled the air, Lucas suddenly began to cry, not the usual fussing of a tired baby, but a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deeper. Angela's reaction was even more startling. Her hands began to tremble, and she looked around the diner with wild eyes, as if the music had triggered some kind of memory she couldn't quite grasp. "Are you okay?" Jack asked, concerned. "That song," Angela whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know that song, but I don't know why. It's like I can almost remember someone singing it to me, but the memory won't come clear." Jack listened more carefully to the lyrics, and suddenly he could hear his mother's voice, clear as day, singing the same hymn as she cooked dinner or folded laundry. She had told him once that it was her favorite song, that it reminded her of someone important who had taught it to her when she was young. "My mother used to sing this," Jack said quietly. "She said it was special to her, connected to someone from her past." Angela looked at him with eyes that seemed to be seeing something beyond the present moment. "What was your mother's name?" she asked, though she seemed almost afraid of the answer. "Elena," Jack replied. "Elena Morrison. Well, Elena Rodriguez before she married my father." The color drained from Angela's face so quickly that Jack thought she might faint. Lucas had stopped crying and was looking at his mother with the wide-eyed attention that babies reserve for moments of high emotion. "Rodriguez," Angela repeated, her voice hollow. "Elena Rodriguez. Did you know her?" Jack asked, though something in his chest already knew the answer would change everything. Angela was quiet for a long moment, staring down at Lucas as if searching for answers in his innocent face. When she finally looked up at Jack, her eyes were filled with tears. "I think," she said slowly, I think she might have been my grandmother." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge. Neither of them was sure they were ready to cross. The diner suddenly felt too small, too bright, too full of possibilities that neither of them had imagined when they sat down for what should have been a simple meal. Jack stared at Angela, searching her features for resemblances he might have missed, connections that would make this impossible coincidence make sense. And slowly, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place, he began to see them. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile, the way she held her head when she was thinking. The road that had brought them together suddenly seemed much more complicated than either of them had realized. Chapter 4. Unraveling Truths. The silence that followed Angela's revelations stretched like a taut wire between them, charged with the electricity of possibility and the weight of implications neither could fully comprehend. Jack stared at the young woman across from him, his mind racing through memories of his mother's stories, searching for pieces that might fit this impossible puzzle. "Tell me about your family," Jack said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Your mother, your grandparents, everything you can remember." Angela shifted Lucas to her other arm, her movements careful and deliberate, as if she were handling something more fragile than just her baby. "That's just it," she said softly. "I don't remember much. My mother, she died when I was very young, maybe 4 or 5 years old. After that, I was in foster care, moved around a lot. Nobody ever talked about my family history." Jack felt something cold settle in his stomach. His mother had mentioned having a daughter once, years ago, during one of her rare moments of vulnerability. She had spoken about a girl she had to give up, a choice that haunted her every day, but she had never provided details. And Jack had been too young and too wrapped up in his own struggles to ask the right questions. "What was your mother's name?" Jack asked, though he wasn't sure he was ready for the answer. "Maria," Angela replied. "Maria Santos. At least, that's what the social workers told me, but I always had this feeling that wasn't the whole truth, like there were pieces missing from my story." Jack's hands trembled as he reached for his coffee cup. Maria. His mother had whispered that name in her sleep sometimes, especially during her final days in the hospital. He had always assumed it was someone from her childhood in Mexico, a friend or relative from the life she had left behind when she came to America. "Angela," Jack said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you have any documents from when you were small? Birth certificate? Anything that might have your mother's maiden name?" Angela's expression grew distant, as if she were reaching back through years of deliberately forgotten memories. "There was a box," she said slowly. "When I aged out of the system, they gave me a small box of things that had been with me when I entered care. I never looked through it properly. It was too painful. Do you still have it?" It's in a storage unit, back in Phoenix. I couldn't afford to keep paying for it after Lucas was born, and I lost my job. They probably threw everything away by now." Jack felt a surge of determination that surprised him with its intensity. "What if I told you I could help you get it back? That storage unit, those documents, they might hold the answers we're both looking for." Lucas chose that moment to reach out toward Jack, his tiny fingers grasping at the air between them. When Jack extended his index finger, the baby wrapped his entire hand around it with the surprising strength that newborns possess. The contact sent another one of those strange jolts of recognition through Jack, as if his body knew something his mind hadn't yet accepted. "There's something else," Angela said quietly, watching the interaction between Jack and her son. "Something I haven't told you." Jack looked up from Lucas's face, noting the tension that had crept back into Angela's voice. "I came back to Compton for a reason," she continued. "There's a woman here, someone I've been looking for. She contacted me about 6 months ago, said she had information about my mother, about where I came from, but when I got here, she wouldn't see me. said it was too dangerous, that some secrets were better left buried. What was her name? Jack asked, though something in his chest already knew this story was about to become even more complicated. Carmen Ruiz. She works at the old St. Mary's Church downtown, has for 30 years. She said she knew my mother when she was young, before everything fell apart. Jack nearly choked on his coffee. Carmen Ruiz. He knew that name, had heard it from his mother's lips more times than he could count. Carmen had been his mother's best friend in the early days, the maid of honor at her wedding. The godmother Jack had never met because of some falling out that his mother would never discuss. My mother talked about Carmen, Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. They were close once, but something happened. Mom would never tell me what. Angela leaned forward, her eyes bright with desperate hope. Do you think Carmen might have answers for both of us? Before Jack could respond, the bell over the diner door chimed, and both of them looked up to see an elderly woman entering. She was small and bent with age, wearing a faded black shawl and moving with the careful steps of someone whose bones held decades of hard work. But when her eyes swept the restaurant and landed on their table, she stopped abruptly. The woman stared at Angela with an expression of such shock that several other diners turned to look. Her weathered hand flew to her throat, and Jack could see her lips moving in what appeared to be a silent prayer. "Carmen," Angela called out tentatively, and the elderly woman's reaction confirmed Jack's suspicion. Carmen Ruiz stood frozen for another moment, then slowly approached their table. Her eyes moved between Angela and Jack, and with each step, her expression grew more troubled. "Dios mío," she whispered when she reached them. "I told you not to come looking for me, child. I told you some doors should stay closed. But I need to know," Angela pleaded. "I need to know where I came from, who my family is, and now," she gestured toward Jack, "now, I think I might have found part of the answer." Carmen's gaze settled on Jack, and he saw recognition dawn in her ancient eyes. "Elena's boy," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You look just like her when she was young. Same eyes, same stubborn jaw." "You knew my mother well," Jack said. It wasn't a question. Carmen pulled an empty chair over to their table and sat down heavily, as if the weight of years and secrets had suddenly become too much to bear. "I knew them both," she said quietly. "Elena and Maria, they were sisters." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. Sisters. His mother had had a sister named Maria, which meant Angela wasn't just some random person he had helped by the side of the road. She was family. She was his niece. And Lucas, the baby currently gripping his finger with such trust and innocence, was his great-nephew. The road that had brought them together suddenly revealed itself to be not a coincidence at all, but a homecoming neither of them had expected. Chapter 5. The Weight of Secrets. The revelation hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Acrid and impossible to ignore, Jack felt the world tilt slightly on its axis as he processed Carmen's words. Sisters. His mother Eleanor had never mentioned having a sister, had always spoken as if she were alone in the world when she came to America. Angela's face had gone pale, and she clutched Lucas closer to her chest as if he were an anchor in a suddenly turbulent sea. "Sisters," she whispered. "But why didn't anyone ever tell me? Why was it such a secret?" Carmen's weathered hands trembled as she reached into her purse and withdrew a worn handkerchief. She dabbed at her eyes, though no tears had yet fallen. "Because some truths are too painful to speak aloud, mija. Because sometimes protecting the people we love means carrying their secrets to our graves." "But you're speaking now," Jack pointed out, his voice rough with emotion. "Why now? What's changed?" Carmen looked between them, her ancient eyes holding depths of sorrow that spoke of decades of carefully guarded pain. "Because I'm old, and I'm tired, and I've watched too many chances for healing slip away. Because maybe, just maybe, it's time for this family to find its way back together. She signaled the waitress for coffee, her movements deliberate and slow, as if she were buying time to organize thoughts that had been locked away for too long. The diner around them seemed to fade into background noise as the three of them sat enclosed in their own bubble of revelation and anticipation. Elena and Maria were twins, Carmen began, her voice so quiet they had to lean forward to hear her. Born 2 minutes apart in a village so small it doesn't even exist on maps anymore. They came to America together when they were 17, young and full of dreams about the life they could build here. Jack tried to reconcile this image with the mother he had known, the woman who had always seemed so solitary, so self-contained. What happened? Why did they separate? Carmen's expression darkened. Love happened, the wrong kind of love, with the wrong kind of man. Maria fell for someone who made promises he had no intention of keeping. Someone who left her with a baby and a heart full of broken dreams. Angela's breath caught. My mother. Your mother was beautiful and trusting and believed that love could conquer anything, Carmen continued. When she found out she was pregnant, she was so happy. She thought this man would marry her, that they would raise their child together. But he disappeared the moment she told him about the baby. Jack felt a surge of protective anger toward a man he had never met. Where was my mother during all this? Elena tried to help, Carmen said sadly. She offered to take Maria in to help raise the baby, but Maria was proud, maybe too proud. She felt ashamed that she had been abandoned, felt like she had brought disgrace on the family name. She moved away, cut off all contact. Elena spent years trying to find her. And did she find her? Angela asked, her voice barely audible. Carmen nodded slowly. She found her when you were 4 years old. Found out that Maria had been struggling with darkness. The kind of darkness that makes a person unable to care for themselves, let alone a child. Jack understood immediately. Depression. His mother had fought her own battles with it, especially after his father left. He could only imagine how much worse it might have been for Maria, alone with a small child and no support system. Elena wanted to take you in, Carmen continued, her eyes fixed on Angela. She fought for you, went to court, did everything she could, but there were complications, legal issues, because Maria had been using a different name, because there were no official records of their relationship as sisters. And Elena had her own problems at the time. A young son to raise alone, financial struggles. The system decided you would be better off in foster care. The injustice of it hit Jack like a physical blow. All those years he had grown up thinking he was alone in the world, while somewhere else, his cousin was growing up in the system, both of them unaware of each other's existence. But why didn't she ever tell me? Jack asked, his voice breaking slightly. Why didn't she ever mention having a sister? Having a niece, because it broke her heart every single day, Carmen replied simply. Because every time she looked at you, she thought about the little girl she couldn't save. Because guilt is a heavy burden, and some people choose to carry it in silence rather than share that pain with the people they love. Angela had been quiet throughout this revelation, but now she spoke up, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. Did she ever stop looking for me? Carmen's eyes filled with tears at this question. Never. Even when she got sick, even during her final days, she would ask me to keep searching. She made me promise that if I ever found you, I would tell you how much she loved you, how sorry she was that she couldn't find a way to bring you home. The words hit Angela like a physical blow, and for the first time since Jack had met her, she began to cry. Not the quiet, contained tears of someone who had learned to grieve in silence, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone finally releasing years of accumulated pain. Jack found himself reaching across the table, offering his hand in comfort. When Angela took it, He felt that same strange jolt of recognition, but now he understood what it was. It was the pull of family, the invisible thread that connected them despite all the years and circumstances that had kept them apart. Lucas began to fuss in response to his mother's distress, and without thinking, Jack stood and gently took the baby from Angela's arms. As he held his great-nephew for the first time, really held him, he felt something shift inside his chest. This wasn't just a chance encounter anymore. This was family. This was responsibility. This was love he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. "There's more," Carmen said quietly. Watching Jack cradle the baby with surprising natural skill. "About why I didn't want Angela to find me. Why I said some secrets should stay buried." Both Jack and Angela looked at her, and Carmen's expression grew troubled. The man who abandoned Maria, the one who left her pregnant and alone, he's still alive, and he's been looking for you, Angela. He's been looking for his son's child. Jack felt ice form in his veins. His son. Carmen nodded grimly. Lucas's father, the boy who got Angela pregnant and then disappeared, just like his father did to Maria 25 years ago. The pattern repeats itself, and now there are powerful people who want to control that pattern. The revelation added a new layer of complexity to their situation, and Jack realized that their chance meeting on the streets of Compton might not have been as random as he had initially believed. Chapter 6. The Hidden Legacy. The weight of Carmen's words settled over them like a heavy blanket, transforming the warm diner into a place where shadows seemed to lurk in every corner. Jack continued to hold Lucas, who had calmed in his arms, as if sensing the protective strength of his newfound family. Angela wiped her tears with a napkin, her composure slowly returning as the shock of revelations began to crystallize into determination. "Who is he?" Angela asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "This man who's been looking for us." Carmen glanced around the diner nervously before leaning closer. "His name is Richard Castellanos. He owns half the businesses in this county, has political connections that reach all the way to the state capital. On the surface, he's a respected businessman and philanthropist. But underneath," she shook her head grimly, "underneath, he's a man who believes he owns whatever he touches, including people." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. And Lucas's father? Where does he fit into this? David Castellanos, Richard's youngest son, 26 years old, charming when he wants to be, and completely incapable of taking responsibility for his actions, just like his father was at that age. Carmen's voice carried the bitterness of someone who had witnessed too much pain caused by the same family. Angela's face had gone pale again. "David told me his last name was Martinez. He said he was in town for work, that he'd be back for me and the baby. I waited for months. He lies as easily as he breathes," Carmen said sadly. "It's a family trait. Richard did the same thing to your mother, used a false name, made promises he never intended to keep. The difference is that now Richard knows about Lucas, and he sees the baby as his legacy, his heir to carry on the Castellanos name." Jack's protective instincts flared dangerously. "Over my dead body." "That might not be hyperbole," Carmen warned. "Richard Castellanos is not a man who accepts no for an answer. When he wants something, he finds a way to get it, legal or otherwise." The baby in Jack's arms gurgled softly, completely unaware that his very existence had become the center of such a dangerous web. Jack looked down at Lucas's innocent face and felt something fundamental shift inside him. This child was family. This child was his responsibility now. "How do you know all this?" Jack asked Carmen. "How do you know so much about the Castellanos family?" Carmen's expression grew even more troubled. "Because I worked for them once, a long time ago, when I was young and needed the money. I was their housekeeper for 3 years, and I saw things that a decent person should never have to witness." She paused, gathering strength for what she was about to reveal. "Richard Castellanos collects people the way others collect art. He finds vulnerable women, charms them, gets them pregnant, and then disappears. But he always keeps tabs on his children, always. Angela gasped. You mean there are others? At least 6 that I know of. Children scattered across 3 states. All with mothers who were abandoned and left to struggle alone. Some of the women never recovered from the experience. Some... Carmen's voice trailed off ominously. Some what? Jack pressed, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Some disappeared entirely when they tried to expose him or demand support. Richard has resources, connections. He makes problems go away. The implications of this revelation hung heavy in the air. Jack understood now why Carmen had been reluctant to see Angela, why she had warned that some secrets should stay buried. Knowledge of Richard Castellanos' activities was dangerous knowledge. But why is he interested in Lucas specifically? Angela asked. If he has other children, other heirs? Carmen's expression grew grim. Because Lucas is different. David actually acknowledged paternity before he disappeared. There are text messages, emails, even a signed letter where he admits the child is his. Richard has never had that kind of legal proof before. With Lucas, he could legitimately claim grandparental rights. Jack felt rage building in his chest. And what? Take the baby away from his mother? It's been done before, Carmen said quietly. Wealthy men with good lawyers can make compelling arguments about providing better opportunities, better education, better everything. Especially when the mother has no resources, no family support, no stable home. But even as she spoke, Jack realized that the situation had changed. Angela wasn't alone anymore. She had family now. She had him. Except she does have family support, Jack said firmly. She has me. Carmen looked at him with surprise and something that might have been hope. You would fight for them, even though you just learned they existed a few hours ago. Their blood, Jack said simply. Their family. And family protects family. Angela looked at him with tears in her eyes. Jack, you don't understand what you're offering. Richard Castellanos has money, power, influence. He could destroy your life, your trucking business, everything you've worked for. Let him try, Jack replied, his voice carrying the quiet conviction of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. I've been running from my past for 30 years. Maybe it's time I stood and fought for my future. Carmen studied both of them for a long moment, then reached into her purse and withdrew a manila envelope. There's something else you need to know. Something I've been keeping safe for 25 years. Waiting for the right moment. She placed the envelope on the table between them. Elena gave this to me before she got sick. Made me promise to give it to Maria's daughter if I ever found her. She said it contained the truth about everything. Documents, photographs, evidence of what Richard did to your mother and to other women. Angela stared at the envelope as if it might contain explosives. Evidence? Your mother was smarter than Richard gave her credit for, Carmen explained. Before her condition got worse, she documented everything. Every conversation, every promise, every lie. She recorded phone calls, saved letters, even took photographs. She knew someday someone would need proof of what he had done. Jack felt a surge of admiration for the aunt he had never met. Maria had been broken by her experience with Richard Castellanos, but she had also been strategic, creating a weapon that could be used to protect her daughter and grandchild. Eleanor added to it over the years, Carmen continued. Every piece of information she could find about Richard's other victims, his business practices, his connections. She was building a case, hoping that someday justice would be possible. Angela reached for the envelope with trembling hands. As she opened it, Jack could see documents, photographs, and what appeared to be legal papers, the evidence of a lifetime of predatory behavior, carefully documented and preserved. With this, Carmen said quietly, you might have a chance, not just to protect Lucas, but to stop Richard from hurting anyone else. As Angela spread the documents across the table, Jack realized that their chance encounter in Compton had been about more than just finding family. It had been about finding purpose, finding the strength to confront a legacy of pain and abuse that had haunted their family for too long. The road ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time since his mother's passing, Jack felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Chapter 7. The Road Home. 3 months had passed since that fateful night in the Compton diner, and the autumn air carried the promise of change as Jack pulled his truck into the driveway of his modest home in Bakersfield. But this time, he wasn't returning alone. Angela sat beside him, Lucas sleeping peacefully in the car seat they had installed with such care, and in the back of the truck were boxes containing not just Angela's few possessions, but the beginning of a new chapter for all of them. The legal battle had been swift but intense. The evidence that Maria and Eleanor had so carefully preserved over the years proved to be more devastating than even Carmen had anticipated. Richard Castellanos' empire of manipulation and abandonment crumbled under the weight of documented testimony from 6 different women across 3 states, each telling remarkably similar stories of promises made and hearts broken. But the most shocking revelation had come not from the documents, but from an unexpected source. During the investigation, David Castellanos himself had come forward, no longer able to live with the guilt of following in his father's footsteps. His testimony revealed the final piece of the puzzle that none of them had seen coming. "I need to tell you something," David had said during their one face-to-face meeting at the lawyer's office, "about why I really left, why I used a false name with Angela." Jack had been ready to throw the young man out, his protective instincts on full alert. But something in David's demeanor, genuine remorse mixed with desperate relief, had made him pause. My father didn't just abandon women," David continued, his voice shaking. "He controlled them. He had people watching them, threatening them if they tried to expose him or demand support. When I realized Angela was pregnant, I panicked. I knew if he found out, he would either try to control her or—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "So you disappeared to protect her," Angela had said quietly, understanding dawning in her voice. "I thought if I stayed away, if I made it seem like I didn't care, he would never know about the baby. I was young and stupid and scared, and I handled it all wrong. But I never stopped thinking about you, about our child." The revelation had recontextualized everything. David's abandonment, while still painful and wrong, had been motivated by fear for Angela's safety rather than simple callousness. It didn't excuse his actions, but it explained them in a way that allowed for the possibility of healing. Now, as Jack helped Angela and Lucas out of the truck, he reflected on how much their lives had changed. The legal victory had been complete. Richard Castellanos was facing multiple charges, and his business empire was under federal investigation. David was in therapy, working to overcome the patterns of behavior he had learned from his father, and had established a college fund for Lucas while respecting Angela's wish to raise her son without his direct involvement for now. Sarah opened the front door before they reached it, her face glowing with the excitement of someone who had been eagerly awaiting this moment. Jack's wife had embraced the sudden expansion of their family with a grace that reminded him why he had fallen in love with her 20 years ago. "Welcome home," she said, wrapping Angela in a warm embrace before gently taking Lucas from his carrier. "Your room is all ready, and I made that soup you liked when you visited last month." Jack's 2 teenagers, Marcus and Elena, named after Jack's mother, crowded around their new cousin with the enthusiastic curiosity of young people discovering they had more family than they knew. The house felt fuller, livelier, more complete than it had in years. As the evening settled into a comfortable rhythm of family dinner and gentle conversation, Jack found himself standing on the back porch, looking out at the sunset. Angela joined him, Lucas sleeping in her arms, and they stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "Thank you," she said finally, "for stopping that day, for listening, for believing me when I needed someone to believe in me." "Thank you for trusting me," Jack replied, "for letting me be part of your story, part of Lucas's life." Angela smiled, and in that expression Jack could see echoes of his mother, of the strength and resilience that ran in their bloodline. "Elena would be proud," she said softly, "of both of us, of what we've built from the pieces she left behind." Jack nodded, feeling the truth of those words settle in his chest like a warm light. His mother's love hadn't ended with her passing. It had lived on in the connections she had fostered, the evidence she had preserved, the family she had always dreamed of reuniting. "The road brought us together," Jack said, thinking of all the miles he had driven, all the highways that had seemed so lonely until now. "But home is what we make of it." As if in response to his words, Lucas opened his eyes and looked up at Jack with the same dark eyes that had graced 3 generations of their family. In that gaze, Jack saw not just the future, but the continuation of a story that had begun with 2 sisters who loved each other enough to sacrifice everything, and who had somehow, against all odds, found a way to bring their children home. The next morning, Jack would return to the road, but not alone. Angela had decided to get her commercial driver's license, to learn the family business that had sustained them through so many struggles. Sarah would help care for Lucas while they were on short runs, and gradually they would build something new, a family trucking business that honored both their past and their future. Carmen had been right that night in the diner. Sometimes protecting the people we love means carrying their secrets. But sometimes, Jack had learned, it means having the courage to share them, to trust in the power of truth and family, to overcome even the darkest legacies. As his truck pulled out of Bakersfield the next morning with Angela in the passenger seat and their first joint delivery secured in the trailer, Jack glanced in his rearview mirror one more time. The road behind them held memories, both painful and precious. But the road ahead held promise, possibility, and the unbreakable bonds of a family that had finally found its way home. Fim da Historia. Dear listeners, we hope that Jack and Angela's story has moved you deeply. Sometimes the most powerful journeys begin with a single act of kindness, a moment when someone chooses to see rather than look away. Their story reminds us that family isn't just about blood. It's about the choices we make to protect, support, and love each other through life's unexpected turns. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment where a stranger became family, or where a chance encounter changed your life forever? We bring you new stories every day that explore the beautiful complexity of human connections and the power of love to overcome even the darkest circumstances. Don't miss our upcoming stories about courage, redemption, and the unexpected ways that destiny brings people together. Your support helps us continue sharing these tales of hope and healing. Until next time, remember, sometimes the road you're meant to travel finds you when you're busy helping someone else find theirs. We'll see you in the comments.